Hey everyone, so today we're going to look at some more exam prep for the two written exams. So we're going to look at the design process. So this typically can be more focused on the second paper, the hour and a half paper. So there's a couple of things we need to look at. So that is what the term iterative means. Now hopefully that's what we're doing now with our design section anyway, so it's not a term that should be relatively new to you. What user-centered design is, the different kinds of research methods that can be used by designers, the difference between primary and secondary research, what anthropometric data is, and then how can it be used, and then how designs are actually developed. Now, a lot of this we'll be doing during our coursework, so a lot of it won't be new information, it's just understanding the actual technical names for what you're doing and how it's applied, not just for you, but how designers in industry can do it as well. So the first thing, the whole thing called iterative design. So this process is basically trying to get away from you come up with a brief, you design something and you make it and that is it. That's like a very linear process. The design process is never meant to be just a straight line. The whole point should be is you have your context, you have your design brief, you figure out what you're going to do. Then you've got your designing, and within the designing you have designing, prototyping, testing, evaluating, and constantly going back over and over again and keep changing it until you get it right. So typically when you're doing your design development and you do a hand sketch and then you would then say make a CAD drawing of it and then you make a prototype model, and while you're making the model you might suddenly realize actually that feature doesn't look too good now that I see it in person in front of me. Maybe I'll go back round and I'll try something different. Or you start to do model and then you test, and maybe you test some construction methods and you suddenly think actually I said I was going to use this type of joint on there, but actually that's not really going to work because the size doesn't quite work, or it's going to look a bit ugly from the side. So you go back round again, you change it and you do a different joining method, or you try a different design. So the whole process being that you're constantly evaluating as you're going through. So that's why in your design section you're constantly looking back at your specification, your brief, you're seeing if you've met the points or not, or whether they need changing slightly. So the whole idea of iterative is it's not just a linear, you just do it and it's done. You should always want to keep looping back round, making changes to it all, seeing what works, evaluating, trying something new, getting some feedback, and just constantly having to keep refreshing, trying to improve it. So that's what the iterative design process is. It's sort of the buzzword in the design world the past 2-3 years. But actually, for the most part, we do coursework. This is what we will do. So user-centered design is a specific philosophy of design where you really have the user at the core of everything that you are doing. So the user is used throughout the entire design and development process. So how you do the iterative process is quite similar, so that you go through and you test and you keep trying things over and over again. User-centered design does the same thing, but you'll have the user involved as well. So yes, with the iterative design and with your coursework, you're getting your client's opinions. But say if you're making, for example, like a kettle or something like that, and if you're designing something and you're making modeling, the whole time you're doing it, you have the user there, like they're next to you, but you'll keep having contact with them. And then when you make a model, you might get them to come in and try and use the model, and then you can photograph and see how they use it. So you can have focus group to see how well it works. So every single step of the way, the user is involved in the process because they can sort of feed into your design of what you want to do. It's a very effective way of designing a product or a service, and you're guaranteed at the end of it you can have something that matches up perfectly to what your user actually needs. And sometimes if you just ask someone, sometimes honestly people don't always know what they want. The best way to do it is if you were to observe them doing it. That's why you have focus groups. So if you are making a kettle and you have like 4 or 5 different kettles in a room and you just get a group of people, you just watch them say, okay, make a cup of tea, make a cup of coffee, and you just watch them use it and you see if there's any issues they're coming across, or any designs that work particularly well or don't work very well. So it's not too dissimilar to its design, but it's just making sure the user is always there in your thought process as well. Now, because you've got the user in there, obviously the ergonomics and anthropometrics are really key in there as well, because you're making sure you've got all that key data. So different types of investigation methods, so different types of research methods. So you've got primary methods. So these are ones that you do yourself in person. Okay, so First one being immersion. So this is where a designer might try and simulate the possible user. So if, for example, you are doing something, designing something with someone that is pregnant, it might be that the designer wears a pregnancy suit to sort of get them in the mindset and the physical, like, manifestation of that as well. A popular one as well is people, if they're designing something with people with arthritis, they might wear restrictive clothing like restrictive gloves, so they can't necessarily use their hands, their fingers as well as they might do. Or designing something for people with not perfect eyesight, so you might wear glasses that sort of reduce your field of vision so you can see what the issues may be. So this is kind of not quite the same as using user-centered design, because it's the designers doing it and sort of getting a feel for themselves, but it's a very useful method to do because it helps them get in the mindset. You can also have interviews. This is where you have the client, not hopefully normally in person, but sometimes that's not always possible, over Skype, over Zoom, over FaceTime, whatever it may be, and just having a chat to the client, trying to figure out what it is they want, what they need, what they're after. Focus groups. So we talked about that a little bit on the previous slide where we had user-centered design. So that's where you would have, so if we go back to the kettle again, so you're in a room and you're designing a new kettle for people with arthritis. What you would do is get 4 or 5 different kettles, get people that suffer with arthritis, and you might try to get people from an older generation, a younger generation, try and get a broad spectrum of people, and you would just observe them using it, because then you could really see, okay, these people have arthritis, what are they really struggling with? Can they open, like, click the buttons properly? Can they open the top? Is the handle too hard to hold on to? So the focus group is a really, really useful way to just observe, because as I said before, interviews, people will tell you, not saying people will lie, but they might not necessarily know what they struggle with without you actually watching them do it as well. So your market research, so this is like your quantitative data where you do your interviews, you do your surveys, and this is where you typically find things like incomes, age, hobbies, interests, those sort of things. They are useful, not so much as useful as things like your focus groups and your interviews and your like immersion therapy and things like that. You can also got analysing, disassembling and evaluating existing products. Now you've had to do this for your coursework anyway, but the best thing you can do if you know you are making a product and it's like an improvement of one that already exists, go and see what's already in the market. Now typically, obviously, you will do that and you just analyse it and like cost, aesthetics, function, those sort of things. But taking them apart is a really useful thing to do, so you can look at the components in it, the materials, how they work, the mechanisms for anything that might open or close or spin and things like that. It's a really, really useful way to get more details than if you were to just sit online, get a picture off the internet, because you can't really tell a lot by doing that. You then have your practical testing, so that might be your workshop test with your materials, so testing certain joints, testing strengths, components, finishes, seeing what paints work, what stains work, testing certain glues and things like that. So those would all fall under your primary methods. Next, you've got your secondary investigations. So these are typically done either online or from resource books. Nowadays, more tends to be done online because resource books tend to go out of date quite quickly, although there's some things that don't. So they let you explore historical, contemporary designers, design movements to help give you inspiration. It's also where you will typically find anthropometric data. So we've done ergonomics anthropometrics before, so where you're looking at the study of the human body. So if you look on the right hand side of the screen, you've got typically you can find loads and loads of textbooks that have anthropometric data, and it will have all different measurements of the human body in different movements, where they're sitting, standing, gripping onto something with their hands in a certain position, using a phone, using chairs, all sorts of things. And that data is already out there for you, so you don't really need to do it again. But there's a lot of the data that you need to find. So typically you would use, if you're designing something for the average person, you would do the 5th to the 95th percentile. So if you look at the table on the left hand side, so this would be a table you see all the anthropometric data in. Now we all for the most part will sit between this 5th and 95th. If you're the 50th, you are bog standard average person, right in the middle, Mr. Average, Mrs. Average. If you are going downwards towards the 5th, you are the small, the weak, the skinny, like the things that are like very like low down. And if you're going to the higher ones, you are on that. So if we take like height, So the average male height is about 5'9". So if you're 5'9", you're probably sitting right around here. Now, as you go further down here, the heights will rise. So I think 95th from last time I checked was about a 6'3", 6'4". And everyone above that would fall into the 5th percentile. So these are ones that would be 6'4", 5, 6, and upwards. And then if you're going down here, you go down to your smaller, so people that maybe under say 5'5", 5'4". Now this data will be different depending on the country you're looking at, depending on the gender you're looking at, depending on the background of that person. So obviously there's not one size fits all for everyone, but that data is all out there and it is really useful. So when you are developing a design proposal, so that could take lots of different forms. So this is now you've done your research and you start to try and get some design ideas down. So typically you would use your hand sketching as the first thing that you would do. The first thing when everyone's getting ideas, pen and paper, pencil and paper, and sketching ideas down. Now we always say making sure really you're doing isometric sketching is typically the one used the most, but things like 2-point perspective, exploded drawings, orthographic, they all have their places. But if you're doing quick sketching, and then modeling, so modeling normally like prototype modeling, rapid prototyping, things like modeling foam board, card, those types of things. Ideas are normally annotated with your thought process and any key notes to explain what you're thinking about, what you're doing, how does it meet the specification to what you've said you're going to do. And then hopefully you've got your client's opinions and thoughts on there as well. So once you've got all that, that's when your final design is chosen. So that's when sizes, materials, costings, all those are refined down into more detail, because you know, right, this is the design we're going to go with. Now we just got to sort out, iron out the finer details. It's going to be this, but exactly what size it's going to be, how are we going to join part A to part B, what materials is it going to be down here, how's it going to be made. So all that's then refined into the final design. And once you've got that, you then have your working drawing. So that's your orthographic 2D drawing where you've got your front, side, back, top and bottom. And that has all the measurements on there, because the idea being that once you're manufacturing, once you have your orthographic drawing, you can just take that in and everything you need is on there, and it's really, really useful. Really, and in theory, if someone is at least okay in a workshop, you can give them that working drawing, that orthographic drawing, and they should be able to do it no problem. So the planning, manufacture and evaluation of a prototype. So once your design is finalized and the manufacturer is planned, so you've got your orthographic drawing done, that's when you then need your step-by-step plan detail. So that is your manufacture plan that we will do once your design section is done. So that is basically listing out everything that you need to do. So that will be all the jobs, and that's where you can't just say get material, cut material, stick together, because that isn't going to help anyone. It should read almost like a recipe cookbook of each step by step. Assume the person reading it doesn't know anything, because things like marking out will be a job. Sometimes collecting the right equipment will be a job. And then we'll have all your key measurements on there. So you have all key steps with your key measurements, the tools and equipment you need, the materials you need, QA, QC, so you quality control, quality assurance. So how are you going to make sure certain jobs are done accurately? So if you're marking out straight lines, making sure you're using a tri-square. If you're drilling holes in a specific place, are you using a jig to make sure you do that? You then have a cutting list, which basically puts that together with materials, so you know what sizes and measurements need to be, so you can get all your materials prepped. So then when your prototype has been made and it's tested and evaluated, that's when you want your client or your end user there to give you some constructive feedback on that, helps you improve it before it can be made for real. So obviously here we're talking about if it's done in an industrial way. So they'll make one final prototype, and that's where they'll get the end user in, especially if they're doing user-centered design. They'll get the user in, they'll use it. Okay, any last thoughts? What do you think about this part of the design? Can you use this lid? Okay, does the button work? What do you think of the handle? And they'll refine it, and once they've made those improvements, that's when it will then go into production. So that is a whistle-stop tour of the design process. Now obviously you are all in the middle of doing your design process now, so it's actually quite a useful time to have this theory anyway. So it's not too dissimilar to how it will be in an industry. Obviously it might not just be one person doing it in industry, it might be a few different people. It might be one person is a specialist in the hand sketching, one person's a specialist in the CAD work, one person's a specialist in prototype making. But while you're in college, and if you go to do university, you're sort of a one-person band at the minute. You sort of learn to do all of the jobs, and then once you go into industry, then you take a specialism that goes with it. If you've got any questions, please do drop me an email and I'll try and answer them in the next video for you. Thank you.